All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Benjamin Taylor. I've met most of you, and thank you very much for being here. Tell you a little bit about me and the firm. I've been licensed to practice law here in Virginia for the last 23 years, and I grew up in Northern Virginia. Also spent 15 years as a judge advocate in the Army Reserve. Been here with Stapleton Elder Law for the better part of the past year. One thing I will ask you, when you think about choosing a firm to help you and your family, I really want to encourage you to select a firm that practices exclusively in the area of estate planning and elder law. This area of the law is very specialized, very complex, and it's changing. So it would serve your family well to choose a firm that focuses exclusively in this area. And that's what Stapleton Elder Law has been doing for the last 25 years. I do want to start with a question. Why are you here today? And the answer could be, I'm here for myself and a spouse, maybe here for a parent, here for a child with special needs. If somebody be brave and volunteer kind of what brought you here today, that can be very helpful to us as we try to focus the presentation. Anybody want to tell me why? Who are you here for? Yes? Thank you all very much, and that will help us focus kind of what we're going to talk about. Well, I want to start here with two very special people here in the Charlottesville community. And many of you know that our founding attorney, Simon Stapleton, is from England. And so his parents were not close by, and his wife, her parents were deceased. And so Norman and Florence kind of functioned as surrogate grandparents for the Stapletons' three children. And 25 years ago, Norman came to Simon and with some very sad news, which was that Florence had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And Simon at the time was an estate planning lawyer and certainly had the wherewithal and the experience to prepare documents to help people prepare for end of life. But this was an entirely new challenge. This wasn't dealing with what happens when you die. This dealt with the issue of what happens when you're alive, but you may need long-term care. And so Norman and Simon really went to school to learn about Alzheimer's disease and not have all of those assets that they'd worked so hard for go toward that nursing home care. And one of the things that we're very proud of here at Stapleton Elder Law is over the past quarter century, there have been many, many Normans and Florences that have come through our doors whom we've been able to help in similar situations. Well, why are so many people concerned? I think we know the answer to that question. Life expectancies continue to increase. I read a statistic that every day in the United States, 10,000 people turn age 65. And of course, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that people are living longer. But it raises the question that a lot of people are facing, which is instead of worrying about, hey, what happens when I die, the question is more on people's mind, what happens if I don't die, but I need long-term care? Well, when we talk about nursing home expenses, costs are rising. Anybody know, what's the average cost of a month in a nursing home here in Central Virginia? What do you think? 5. Saying 5,000? Okay. Anybody else? What's it, 6? It's averaging in our area between $8,000 and $9,000 a month. So obviously that's something that's very serious issue for most middle-class families. And the critical thing here on this slide is really that second bullet point, which says you may lose everything and be at the poverty level, but the rest of that is without advanced planning. All right, how will you pay for it if you or a member of your family needs long-term care? And we have some options up here on the board, and I'm going to talk about each of these doors. Door number one is Medicare. And a lot of people know about Medicare and use Medicare. The short answer is Medicare is an insurance program that's designed to pay for short-term stays in the hospital, but it will not pay the expenses of long-term nursing home care. Another option that we're going to discuss in a moment is Medicaid. Medicaid is designed for long-term care, and so that can be an option. Medicaid does have strict income and asset requirements, which we'll discuss in a moment. Well, door number two, the VA. So we may have some veterans here or family members of veterans, And the short answer is the VA does not pay for long-term custodial care. There are some great VA benefits that we're going to talk about that you and your family may be advised to avail yourself of, but the VA is not an option to pay for long-term care in a nursing home. Well, how about doors 3 and 4, private insurance and HMOs? Again, like Medicare, these are designed to pay for short-term hospital stays, but they're not designed for the cost of care in a nursing home. So we're left at door number 5, which is you or your family paying those exorbitant costs. So private pay, spending your own assets or using long-term care insurance. Now we may have some folks that have long-term care insurance. And one thing I want to advise you, because those premiums are going to continue to rise, and sometimes people think about canceling those policies. If you're in a position where you actually have purchased a long-term care policy and you still have it active, I want to strongly encourage you to speak to an elder care attorney before you take that step, because once you take that step of canceling this kind of policy, it's essentially impossible to revive it. So I understand sometimes people are very concerned about the cost of long-term care insurance. If you do have such a policy, though, please talk to a lawyer before making the decision to step away from that policy. Well, let's talk about the veterans side of the equation. And as I mentioned, veteran benefits are not sufficient to pay for long-term care in a nursing home, but they do provide some very important options for qualifying veterans. The rules for eligibility and such are complex, and so those are better suited for a one-on-one discussion. But I just want to hit the wave tops here and talk about a particular veteran benefit that many people are not aware of. It's the aid and attendance pension benefit. We know from the VA that over 90% of veterans that are eligible for the aid and attendance pension benefit are not getting it. The maximum benefit is about $2,800 a month for a married veteran. So again, this is something that's not designed to cover the full cost of long-term custodial care, but it can be very helpful for a veteran who's living at home, who's living in independent living in a retirement community, or living in assisted living. As I mentioned, there are income and asset requirements for aid and attendance, and so for most people, the maximum allowable assets are $160,000. And so that disqualifies a lot of people. But one of the things you want to think about when you think about aid and attendance is, and the VA encourages folks to do this, if you have assets that exceed that amount, those can be placed in a trust. And when those assets are in a trust, the VA looks at that and does not count those assets against you for purposes of this benefit. And so when assets are put in a trust, if you put them in a trust today in July of 2025, those assets are fully protected 3 years later, and that's July of 2028. So it really emphasizes the value of planning ahead, because this 3-year look-back period is such that you're not able to take advantage of the benefits of putting these assets in a trust immediately. It's only going to be after 3 years have elapsed. So let's talk about crisis planning. Many people come to our office when their family is in crisis. And in order to deal with crisis, the first thing we want to talk about is what is Medicaid. And I alluded to Medicaid earlier in the slideshow. Medicaid is financial assistance for people to live in a nursing home. And again, we don't want to confuse that with Medicare. Medicare is an insurance program that's designed to cover short-term hospital stays. But Medicaid is designed to cover nursing home care. And as I mentioned, in order to qualify for Medicaid, you have to meet strict income and asset limitations. I do want to tell you that there are some assets that count against you as it relates to Medicaid, and there are other assets that are exempt. So the assets that are exempt are your primary home, one car, prepaid funeral expenses if you have those, some life insurance policies, and household goods. Those things do not count against you. Those are exempt. But basically everything else is what's called accountable assets. So generally what we're talking about is cash assets. Those things count against you when you're applying for Medicaid. So let's take a look at our example of John and Agnes. And John and Agnes have cash assets that total about $300,000. And let's suppose that John is about to go into a nursing home today, and Agnes is going to stay at home in the family home. Are they going to qualify for Medicaid? Well, let's take a look. Here's the way the calculation works. We'll take a look at Agnes first. She's the community spouse. We call her the community spouse because she is living in the community. John is living in the nursing home, so he's called the institutionalized spouse. Agnes is entitled to what's called a community spouse resource allowance, and that's around $150,000. So she's entitled to that $150,000. But what about John? Is John going to qualify for Medicaid? And the answer is no, because what Medicaid's going to say is, John, as long as your cash assets are more than $2,000, you don't qualify. And so that's what we're talking about here, is John needs to actually, in this crisis situation, get his countable assets down to the $2,000 level. And how can he do that? Well, we just talked about assets that are exempt, you know, the house, the car, and a few other things. So John can certainly pay off the mortgage on the house, can pay off other debts. He could even buy Agnes a new car. That's moving his cash assets into the exempt world. The other option that he's got in this crisis situation is to purchase an annuity for Agnes. And if we put round numbers up here, if he purchases that annuity for $148,000, that will get his assets down to the $2,000 level. And Agnes, at the same time, will now have an increased income because that annuity will pay Agnes about $1,200 a month over the next 10 years. So that really accomplishes two good things. It reduces John's assets and it increases Agnes's income. So those are some strategies that can be utilized in a crisis situation. When we're talking about putting assets into a trust to make them not countable for Medicaid purposes, there is now a 5-year look-back period for Medicaid. And so again, it really shows the value of planning ahead. And before I turn the floor over to Simon, let me just emphasize this for clarity, because sometimes people get confused. What I just talked about in terms of the crisis planning, those are all strategies that could be employed today. So in other words, if John executed the strategies I just described in July of 2025, he would be eligible for Medicaid in August of 2025. So that's a crisis planning strategy. Simon's now going to talk about some things that you can do when you're planning ahead. Thank you all very much for your attention.